Welcome to a tour unlike any other. Today we're tracing the lives and final resting places of those who brought the Poltergeist films to life. The actors, the directors, the composer. The people who scared a generation and, in more ways than one, became forever entangled with the legacy of one of the most talked-about horror franchises in cinema history. Some rest in famous cemeteries surrounded by Hollywood royalty. Others lie in quiet country graveyards or have no grave at all. Their stories span decades, cross the country, and in one case, cross the Atlantic. So let's begin where the story itself began, with a little girl, a television set, and three of the most famous words in horror. We open at Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles. It's a small cemetery tucked behind high-rise office buildings just off Wilshire Boulevard, and if you didn't know it was there, you'd walk right past it. But behind its modest walls lie some of the biggest names in entertainment: Marilyn Monroe, Dean Martin, Jack Lemmon, Natalie Wood, and many more. We're here today to visit two of the youngest, both taken far too soon, and both from the same film. Heather O'Rourke was 5 years old when Steven Spielberg spotted her in the MGM commissary, eating lunch with her mother, while her older sister Tammy was on set shooting the Steve Martin picture Pennies from Heaven. Spielberg was looking for what he called a beatific 4-year-old, every mother's dream, to star in his upcoming horror film. He approached the family and offered Heather the role on the spot. She was signed the next day, beating out a young Drew Barrymore, who instead landed the role of Gertie in E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Not a bad consolation prize for either girl, as it turned out. In Poltergeist, Heather played Carol Ann Freeling, the angelic little blonde who becomes the conduit for supernatural forces tormenting her suburban family. Her delivery of the line, "They're here," became one of the most iconic moments in horror history. It sits at number 69 on the American Film Institute's list of 100 greatest movie quotes. When the sequel came along 4 years later, her tagline, "They're back," worked its way just as deeply into the American vocabulary. She was one of only 2 original cast members to appear in all 3 Poltergeist films. Between the movies, Heather kept busy on television. She had a recurring role on Happy Days, won a Young Artist Award for her work on Webster, and appeared on shows like Chips in Our House. By all accounts, she was a straight-A student, a budding calligrapher, and the proud president of her 5th grade class at Big Bear Elementary School. She told interviewers she planned to attend UCLA someday and become a film director. It was not to be. In 1987, Heather fell ill and was misdiagnosed with Crohn's disease. On January 31, 1988, she began showing flu-like symptoms at her family's home in Lakeside, California. The next morning, she collapsed. Paramedics rushed her to a local hospital where she suffered cardiac arrest. They restarted her heart and airlifted her to Children's Hospital of San Diego, where surgeons discovered a congenital narrowing of the intestine, the true cause of her illness, undetected her entire life. She survived emergency surgery but suffered a second cardiac arrest in the recovery room. Doctors worked for over 30 minutes, but Heather O'Rourke was pronounced dead that afternoon. She was 12 years old. A private funeral was held a few days later, and Heather was entombed here at Westwood. Her final film, Poltergeist 3, was released 4 months after her death. Not far from Heather, in the same small cemetery, rests another young woman from the Poltergeist cast whose death was every bit as shocking, though for very different reasons. Dominique Dunne played Dana Freeling, the teenage older sister in the original Poltergeist. It was her breakout role, and it should have been the beginning of a long career. She came from a prominent family. Her father was Dominique Dunne, the writer and producer who would later become famous as a Vanity Fair correspondent covering high-profile trials. Her uncle was the novelist John Gregory Dunne, married to the essayist Joan Didion. Her brother Griffin became an actor and director in his own right. Hollywood ran in this family's blood. After Poltergeist wrapped in the summer of 1982, Dominique was cast in the upcoming science fiction miniseries V. She was rehearsing at her West Hollywood home on the evening of October 30th, running lines with fellow actor David Packer when her ex-boyfriend, a chef named John Thomas Sweeney, showed up unannounced. The relationship had been abusive, Sweeney had previously attacked Dominique badly enough that visible bruises were captured on camera when she filmed an episode of Hill Street Blues just one day after an assault. She had ended the relationship and changed the locks. That night, Sweeney and Dominique argued in the driveway. He strangled her until she was unconscious. When police arrived, Sweeney was standing beside her body and told the officers outright that he had killed his girlfriend. Dominique was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where she was diagnosed as brain dead. Her parents made the agonizing decision to remove her from life support 5 days later, on November 4th. Dominique Dunne was 22 years old. Sweeney was charged with first-degree murder but convicted only of voluntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to 6.5 years and served less than 4 before being released on parole. The outcome enraged Dominique's family. Her father kept a journal throughout the trial, which he later published in Vanity Fair in an article that launched his second career as a writer covering the American justice system. Her mother, Ellen, founded Justice for Homicide Victims, a victims' rights organization, in the year following Dominique's death. Dominique was laid to rest here at Westwood after a funeral at the Church of the Good Shepherd. She and Heather O'Rourke, the on-screen sisters from Poltergeist, now rest within the same small cemetery, both taken tragically young. Let's leave Westwood now and head a few miles south to Culver City, where the grounds of Hillside Memorial Park await. Hillside is a Jewish cemetery on a hillside overlooking the San Diego freeway, and it's the resting place of the man who gave Poltergeist its sonic heartbeat. If you have ever been to the movies, you have almost certainly heard the work of Jerry Goldsmith, even if you didn't know his name. Think about the ominous choral chanting in The Omen, the eerie, avant-garde soundscape of Planet of the Apes, the stirring, militaristic march of Patton, the lush, melancholy score of Chinatown, the unsettling tension beneath every corridor of Alien, the heroic brass fanfare that opens every Star Trek film from the motion picture through Nemesis. A melody so good that Gene Roddenberry insisted it become the theme for Star Trek: The Next Generation as well. Goldsmith composed music for over 200 films and television shows across a career spanning 5 decades. He started out in the early 1950s as a clerk typist in the CBS music department, but he was soon composing original scores for live radio shows and early television dramas. By the 60s, he was one of the most sought-after composers in Hollywood, writing for series like The Twilight Zone, Dr. Kildare, and The Man from U.N.C.L.E. When he moved into feature films, the accolades came fast. He received 18 Academy Award nominations over the course of his career, a staggering number, and won once for his choral and orchestral score for The Omen in 1976. He also took home 5 Emmy Awards for his television work. For Poltergeist, Goldsmith created a score that could shift from suburban warmth to otherworldly terror in the span of a few measures. The music is both beautiful and deeply unsettling, perfectly matching the film's trick of hiding the supernatural inside the ordinary. It was one of many collaborations with directors who trusted him to elevate their pictures, and it remains one of the finest horror scores ever composed. Here's a detail that's pure Jerry Goldsmith. When he was nominated for his Omen score, he was so certain he would lose, after 8 prior nominations without a win, that he nearly didn't attend the ceremony. Producer Harvey Bernhard talked him into going, and when Goldsmith's name was called, he was as surprised as anyone in the room. Beyond the movies, Goldsmith composed the fanfare that opens every Academy Awards telecast. You've heard it dozens of times. And that iconic orchestral logo that plays before Universal Pictures films? That was Goldsmith too, commissioned in 1997 for The Lost World, Jurassic Park. Goldsmith battled colon cancer in his final years, and he died at his Beverly Hills home on July 21, 2004, at 75. He was laid to rest here at Hillside Memorial Park, where a funeral attended by some 400 mourners celebrated a life spent in service to the art of film music. From the gentle hills of a Los Angeles cemetery, our tour now takes a considerable leap, all the way across the country to a quiet corner of northern New Jersey, to Cedar Park Cemetery in the borough of Paramus. Here we come face to face, so to speak, with the most terrifying figure in the entire Poltergeist franchise. Julian Beck was not a horror actor. For most of his life, he was one of the most radical figures in American theater. In 1947, he and his wife, Judith Malina, co-founded the Living Theater, an avant-garde company that pioneered confrontational, improvisational performance art. Their productions were deliberately provocative: nudity, audience participation, political protest woven into the fabric of the performance. Beck and Malina were arrested more than a dozen times on 3 continents for offenses ranging from indecent exposure to failing to participate in a civil defense drill. They were anarchists and pacifists, poets and provocateurs, and they changed the face of American theater. Jim Morrison, the Doors frontman, was deeply influenced by their work. Then, in the autumn of his life, Beck took on a role that would make him immortal in an entirely different world. In 1985, at the age of 60, he was cast as Reverend Henry Kane in Poltergeist II, The Other Side, the gaunt, hollow-eyed preacher who appears at the Freeling's door, smiling with malevolent patience, trying to lure Carol Ann away. It is one of the most chilling performances in 80s horror, and the reason it works so well is heartbreaking. Beck had been diagnosed with stomach cancer in late 1983. By the time he began filming Poltergeist 2 in the spring of 1985, the disease had ravaged him. He was 60 years old but looked decades older, skeletal, sunken, with an intensity that no makeup department could have manufactured. Whether Beck intended it or not, his illness became the character's greatest asset. Reverend Kane is terrifying precisely because something about him feels genuinely wrong, genuinely otherworldly. Beck was determined to finish what would become his final screen role, and he nearly did. He died on September 14, 1985, at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City while the film was still in post-production. Some of his dialogue had to be re-recorded by a sound-alike. Poltergeist 2 was released the following May, 8 months after his death. Beck was laid to rest here at Cedar Park Cemetery. Nearly 2 decades later, in 2004, he was inducted into the American Theater Hall of Fame, recognized not for frightening moviegoers, but for transforming the stage. Our next stop carries us to the rolling Berkshire Hills of western Massachusetts and a small burial ground called William Henry Lee Memorial Cemetery in the town of New Marlborough. It's about as far from Hollywood as you can get in spirit, and it's the final resting place of the woman who played the team of paranormal researchers leader in the original Poltergeist. Beatrice Straight was a woman of extraordinary pedigree, both on stage and off. She was born into the Whitney family, one of the wealthiest dynasties in American history. Her maternal grandfather was William Collins Whitney, the political powerhouse and financier. Her father, Willard Dickerman Straight, was an investment banker and diplomat who died of influenza in France during the 1918 pandemic, when Beatrice was only 4. After her mother remarried a British agronomist, the family moved to Devon, England, where young Beatrice grew up at Dartington Hall and discovered a love of acting. Returning to the United States, Straight made her Broadway debut in 1939 and spent the next decade establishing herself as a serious stage actress. She was a founding member of the Actors Studio, attending classes alongside Marlon Brando, Montgomery Clift, and Sidney Lumet. In 1953, she won the Tony Award for Best Featured Actress in a Play for her portrayal of Elizabeth Proctor in Arthur Miller's The Crucible. But it was a 5-minute scene in the 1976 film Network that cemented her place in cinema history. Playing the wife of William Holden's character, Straight delivered a devastating monologue confronting her husband's infidelity, and won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. Her screen time of 5 minutes and 2 seconds remains the shortest performance ever to win an acting Oscar. It's a record that has stood for nearly half a century. 6 years later, Straight took on the role of Dr. Martha Lesh, the parapsychologist who leads the initial investigation of the Freeling home in Poltergeist. It's a more restrained performance, authoritative, compassionate, grounded, and it gave the film's supernatural chaos a human anchor. If you watch Poltergeist again, notice how much of the audience's trust flows through Straight. She makes you believe that these extraordinary events are being handled by someone competent, which paradoxically makes them scarier. Straight continued acting into the 1990s, with television appearances on shows like St. Elsewhere and a handful of film roles. In her later years, she reportedly suffered from Alzheimer's disease. She died of pneumonia on April 7, 2001, at the age of 86, and was laid to rest here in this peaceful Massachusetts cemetery, a long way from the spotlights of Broadway and the sound stages of Hollywood. Now we turn from the elegant stages of New York and the quiet countryside of New England to the rough and tumble world of independent filmmaking in Texas. Our next subject has no grave to visit. His remains were cremated, and the location of his ashes is not publicly known. But his shadow looms over this entire tour because without him, there would be no Poltergeist to begin with. Tobe Hooper was born in Austin, Texas in 1943, the son of a couple who managed a hotel on Congress Avenue, right in the heart of downtown. 4 movie theaters stood within walking distance of the family hotel, and young Tobe practically grew up in them. He started making amateur movies with the family's 8mm camera as a boy, and by the time he enrolled at the University of Texas at Austin, filmmaking was all he wanted to do. A pivotal moment came on August 1, 1966, when Hooper was on the UT campus during the mass shooting carried out by Charles Whitman from the university clock tower. Hooper witnessed the fatal shooting of a police officer just yards away from him. The experience left a mark. Years later, he would channel a profound sense of random, inexplicable terror into his work. In 1974, Hooper unleashed the Texas Chainsaw Massacre on an unsuspecting world. Made for less than $300,000 with a crew so green it was the cinematographer's first feature, the film became one of the most profitable independent pictures of the decade and one of the most influential horror films ever made. Several countries banned it outright. Critics were divided. Harper's called it a vile little piece of sick crap, while Roger Ebert dismissed it as purposeless. But its reputation grew and grew. John Carpenter would later call it a seminal work in horror cinema, and William Friedkin, director of The Exorcist, remembered Hooper as a kind, warm-hearted man who made the most terrifying film ever. Here's the thing about Texas Chainsaw Massacre that surprises people. There's remarkably little on-screen blood. Hooper once told NPR's Terry Gross that he had genuinely tried to get a PG rating, calling the MPAA during production to ask what he could get away with. He didn't get his PG. The film was rated R, but his instinct to suggest rather than show was what made it so effective. The horror lives in your imagination, not on the screen. 8 years later, Hooper directed Poltergeist from a screenplay co-written by Steven Spielberg, who also produced. It was Hooper's biggest budget and his biggest commercial success, though the question of who really directed the film, Hooper or Spielberg, has been debated ever since. The film was a hit with both critics and audiences, grossing over $76 million, and it cemented the so-called Poltergeist curse in the public imagination when tragedy after tragedy struck the cast in the years that followed. Hooper continued working in film and television for decades. Salem's Lot, Life Force, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre sequel, episodes of Tales from the Crypt and Freddy's Nightmares, and the pilot of Spielberg's miniseries Taken. But nothing ever matched the 1-2 punch of Chainsaw Massacre and Poltergeist. He died of natural causes on August 26, 2017, at his home in the Sherman Oaks neighborhood of Los Angeles. He was 74. His remains were cremated. From a man whose ashes scattered to the unknown, let's travel to the Oklahoma countryside, to a place called Graves Creek Cemetery in the small community of Hitchita, within the boundaries of the Muskogee Creek Nation. This is hallowed ground in more ways than one. Will Sampson stood 6 feet 5 inches tall, with a presence that filled any room or screen he occupied. A member of the Muskogee Nation, he was born in Okmulgee County, Oklahoma, and for the first 20 years of his adult life, he was a rodeo man, riding broncos on the circuit. He was also a gifted painter. His work has been exhibited at the Gilcrease Museum and the Philbrook Museum of Art, and his large painting of the ribbon dance of the Muskogee people hangs in the Creek Council House Museum in Okmulgee. Acting came to Sampson almost by accident. In the mid-1970s, producers Saul Zaentz and Michael Douglas were searching for a tall Native American to play Chief Bromden in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, opposite Jack Nicholson. A rodeo announcer who knew Sampson mentioned his name. After a lengthy search, they found him, auditioned him, and hired him based on the strength of a single interview. He had never acted before. The gamble paid off magnificently. Sampson's Chief Bromden is one of the great silent performances in American film. Towering, watchful, heartbreaking. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest won the Best Picture Oscar that year, and Sampson's career was launched. He went on to appear alongside Clint Eastwood in The Outlaw Josie Wales, starred in the Canadian film Fish Hawk, which earned him a Genie Award nomination, and took roles in Orca and several television series. In 1986, Sampson joined the Poltergeist franchise as Taylor, a Muskogee medicine man who guides the Freeling family through their second encounter with the supernatural in Poltergeist 2. It was a role that mattered to him. Sampson was deeply committed to authentic representation of Native Americans on screen. He founded the American Indian Registry for the Performing Arts, working to open doors for indigenous actors in Hollywood. During the filming of an earlier picture, The White Buffalo, he had actually halted production when he discovered producers had hired white actors to play native roles, refusing to act until the matter was addressed. Sampson suffered from scleroderma, a degenerative autoimmune disease that attacked his heart, lungs, and skin. During his lengthy illness, his weight dropped from 260 pounds to 140. He underwent a heart and lung transplant at Houston Methodist Hospital, but died on June 3, 1987, from post-operative kidney failure. He was 53 years old. He was buried here at Graves Creek Cemetery, on the land where he grew up. There's a wonderful story about his Poltergeist 2 co-star, Craig T. Nelson, who happened to be passing through Oklahoma some years later and wanted to pay his respects. Nelson drove around for hours looking for the cemetery, until he finally stopped at a corner store and asked for directions. The man standing next to him in the store turned out to be Sampson's cousin, who led him right to the grave. Nelson remembers the cicadas were deafening that day. Staying in the world of Texas film, our next stop takes us to Austin, a city we've already touched on through Tobe Hooper, and a city that plays a central role in the story of our next subject. There is no grave to visit here, but the story demands to be told. Lou Perryman was a character actor in the truest and best sense of that term. He had a face that was 1 part Slim Pickens, 2 parts Claude Akins, and a drawl as wide as West Texas. He was a fixture of the Austin film community, one of the city's earliest working actors, and a man universally described by those who knew him as a sweetheart, a charmer, and a born storyteller. In the original Poltergeist, Perryman played a small role, credited as Pugsley, one of the construction workers. It was a blink-and-you-miss-it part in a big Hollywood picture, but that was typical of Perryman's career. He scored choice bits in major films, a hostile redneck bar patron in The Blues Brothers, a sheriff in Boys Don't Cry, while pouring his real passion into Texas independent cinema. He starred in Eagle Pennell's landmark indie feature The Whole Shootin' Match in 1978, a no-budget film that Robert Redford would later cite as an influence on the creation of the Sundance Film Festival. He followed that with another Pennell collaboration, Last Night at the Alamo, a beautifully observed study of barroom culture in working-class Houston. Perryman's deepest connection to horror came through the same director who helmed Poltergeist. He worked behind the scenes on the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre as an assistant cameraman. And years later, Tobe Hooper brought him back in front of the camera for Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, where Perryman played LG, the radio station manager, a part fans remember fondly to this day. Between acting jobs, Perryman drove a taxi in Austin. He co-wrote a stage play called In the West, performed at Schultz Garden and other local venues, and remained a beloved figure in the city's arts community. He was, as the Austin Chronicle put it, a lifetime dues-paying member of that fast-vanishing breed, the native Texan yarn-spinning actor and all-around good guy. On April 1, 2009, Lou Perryman was murdered in his home in South Austin. A 26-year-old man named Seth Christopher Tatum recently released from prison for aggravated robbery, broke into Perryman's house and killed him with an axe. The two men did not know each other, Tatum later confessed, and was sentenced to serve at least 40 years before parole eligibility. Lou Perryman was 67 years old. From the quiet grief of an Austin neighborhood, let us shift to a spirit that burned brighter and more fiercely than most. A woman who stood 4 feet 3 inches tall and commanded every room she entered. Zelda Rubinstein has no grave for us to visit. Per her own request, no funeral was held after her death. But she left a mark on Poltergeist that no one who has seen the film can forget. Picture the scene. A suburban family is in crisis. The ghosts have taken their youngest daughter. The parapsychologists are out of their depth. And then, through the front door, walks this tiny, peculiar woman with an ethereal, childlike voice who surveys the chaos and announces with absolute authority, "This house is clean." Except, of course, it isn't. Not yet. Zelda Rubinstein played Tangina Barons, the psychic medium who guides the Freeling family through the recovery of Carol Ann from the other side. Film critic Pauline Kael, who had little good to say about Poltergeist as a whole, made a special exception for Rubinstein, writing that she gives the movie new life and makes a large chunk of it work. Steven Spielberg, who co-wrote the screenplay, said the role was written specifically with a short-statured actress in mind. He wanted to show that someone's size had nothing to do with her psychic powers. Before Poltergeist, Rubinstein had spent decades as a medical laboratory technician, working in blood banks after earning a degree in bacteriology from the University of Pittsburgh. She didn't pursue acting until she was 45 years old. Her first film role was in the 1981 comedy Under the Rainbow, and Poltergeist followed almost immediately, transforming her life overnight. She reprised the role of Tangina in both Poltergeist sequels. She and Heather O'Rourke were the only cast members to appear in all 3 films. Beyond the franchise, Rubinstein appeared in 16 Candles, Teen Witch, and the television series Picket Fences, and she provided the voice for Skittles Candies in their long-running television campaign. But Rubinstein's legacy extends well beyond acting. In the mid-1980s, when the AIDS crisis was devastating communities and public figures were largely silent, Rubinstein became one of the first celebrities to speak out. She appeared in a series of public service advertisements, playing a mother urging her gay son to practice safe sex. The campaign was groundbreaking and courageous, and Rubinstein later acknowledged that it cost her career opportunities. She didn't work for a year afterward. She did it anyway. She also founded the Michael Dunne Memorial Repertory Theater Company, a nonprofit for actors under 4 feet 6, and remained a passionate advocate for the rights of little people throughout her life. Rubinstein suffered a heart attack in late 2009 and never fully recovered. She died on January 27, 2010, at Barlow Respiratory Hospital in Los Angeles. She was 76. Per her wishes, no funeral was held and no burial site exists. The world simply had to remember her, which, given the indelibility of Tangina Barons, has proven easy enough. From a woman who requested no farewell at all, let's turn to a man who kept working, kept showing up, and kept being that actor whose face everyone recognized even if they couldn't quite place the name. James Karen lived to be 94 years old, and by the time he died, he had racked up over 200 film and television credits. His remains were cremated and his ashes were given to his family. In Poltergeist, Karen played Mr. Teague, the real estate developer who built the planned community of Cuesta Verde on top of a former cemetery. He moved the headstones to make room for the houses, but he didn't move the bodies. When Craig T. Nelson's character finally confronts him with this discovery, the look on Teague's face is one of the great guilty moments in horror cinema. Karen played it perfectly, not as a villain, but as a man who knows he cut a terrible corner and is about to pay for it. Born Jacob Karnofsky in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, to Russian immigrant parents, Karen found his way to acting through an unlikely mentor. As a young man walking home from school, a local figure stuck his head out a window and told him he ought to be in the theater. That man was Daniel J. Flood, who would go on to serve as a United States congressman. Karen took his advice, changed his name, served in the Army Air Forces during World War II, and then enrolled at the Neighborhood Playhouse School of the Theater in New York. His big break came when he was cast as the understudy for Carl Malden in the original Broadway production of A Streetcar Named Desire, alongside Marlon Brando. From there, the roles never stopped. On television, he was a regular on As the World Turns and All My Children, played a recurring role on 8 is Enough, and made memorable guest appearances on Seinfeld, The Golden Girls, and The Larry Sanders Show. For more than 20 years, he was the television spokesman for the Pathmark supermarket chain, which made him so recognizable on the East Coast that he was affectionately known as Mr. Pathmark. In film, Karen appeared in All the President's Men, The China Syndrome, 3 Oliver Stone pictures, Wall Street, Nixon, and Any Given Sunday, and David Lynch's Mulholland Drive. He played the casting director bowled over by Naomi Watts' audition in that film, and he played the business mogul who gives Will Smith a chance in The Pursuit of Happiness. But horror fans know him best for 2 roles, Mr. Teague in Poltergeist, and Frank, the medical warehouse manager, in The Return of the Living Dead. In that cult classic, Karen helped write his character's ending, a scene in which Frank, realizing he's turning into a zombie, kisses his wedding ring and walks into a crematorium. Karen later joked that the real reason he wrote it that way was to avoid spending the rest of the shoot standing in the rain as a background zombie. James Karen died on October 23, 2018, at his home in Los Angeles. His friend George Clooney paid tribute by sharing a story. Karen's wife had once asked Clooney to prepare a eulogy. 4 years later, Clooney called to check in and was told Karen was doing fine. He just wanted to see what everyone would say about him while he was still around to enjoy it. That tells you everything about the man. Our tour has moved through mausoleums and country graveyards from coast to coast, and now we arrive at a man whose connection to Poltergeist was brief, a bit part, really, but whose life story is worthy of a film all its own. Sonny Landham died in Lexington, Kentucky on August 17, 2017, from congestive heart failure at the age of 76. The specifics of his burial are not publicly documented. In Poltergeist, Landham was credited as pool worker number 2, one of those blink-and-you-miss-it parts. But you might very well recognize him from another role entirely. 5 years after Poltergeist, Landham played Billy Soul, the stoic, machete-wielding tracker in Predator, alongside Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's the role that defined his career, the quiet warrior who senses the alien's presence before anyone else and faces it alone with nothing but a blade. Schwarzenegger remembered him publicly after his death, writing that he was such a joy to work with. Landham was born in Canton, Georgia, and raised in Rome, Georgia. He attended Darlington School and played football for a year at the University of Georgia before transferring to Oglethorpe University. After college, he served in the U.S. Army, worked in an oil field, and studied acting for 2 years at the Pasadena Playhouse. His early career included appearances in The Warriors, Southern Comfort, and 48 H'ers, where he played Billy Bear opposite Eddie Murphy and Nick Nolte. Landham had a turbulent life outside of acting. He made several unsuccessful runs for political office in Kentucky, including a bid for governor in 2003, inspired perhaps by the gubernatorial and senatorial victories of his Predator castmates Schwarzenegger and Jesse Ventura. A brief Libertarian Party Senate nomination in 2008 was rescinded after he made inflammatory remarks on a political radio program. His later years were marked by legal troubles, health problems, and financial difficulties. Still, when you mention Predator to anyone of a certain age, they remember Billy, standing on that log bridge, shirt off, drawing his knife, ready to face something no human should have to face. That image endures. For our final stop, we cross the Atlantic Ocean to London, England, where our tour ends with a man most Poltergeist fans have never heard of, but one whose career touched some remarkable projects. Brian Gibson was born in Southend-on-Sea, Essex in 1944, the son of a shop assistant and a carpenter. He was a bright student, winning a place at St. Catherine's College, Cambridge, where he originally studied medicine. But the pull of film was stronger than the pull of the stethoscope. By the late 1960s, Gibson was working for the BBC, directing scientific documentaries for their long-running series, Horizon. One of those documentaries, a 1974 episode called Joey, about a brain-damaged man who found a way to communicate through another patient, won him an SFTA award and announced him as a filmmaker of real sensitivity. Gibson made his feature film debut with Breaking Glass in 1980, a rock drama starring Hazel O'Connor as a punk singer navigating the British music scene. Then, in 1986, he was handed the unenviable task of directing a sequel to one of the biggest horror hits of the decade, Poltergeist 2. The Other Side brought back most of the original cast, added Julian Beck's unforgettable Reverend Kane and Will Sampson's Taylor, and tasked Gibson with following in the footsteps of Tobe Hooper and Steven Spielberg. The film received mixed reviews, but it performed reasonably at the box office and introduced elements, particularly Kane, that became central to the franchise's mythology. Gibson went on to considerably more acclaimed work. His 1991 HBO film The Josephine Baker Story, starring Lynn Whitfield, who was also his wife at the time, won him a Primetime Emmy Award and a Directors Guild of America Award. 2 years later, he directed What's Love Got to Do with It?, the Tina Turner biographical drama starring Angela Bassett and Lawrence Fishburne, which earned 2 Academy Award nominations. His final directorial effort, the 1998 British comedy Still Crazy, about a fictional 70s rock band reuniting 2 decades later, earned 2 Golden Globe nominations and featured a cast including Bill Nighy and Billy Connolly. He also served as an executive producer on Frida, the 2002 Salma Hayek film about painter Frida Kahlo. Gibson was diagnosed with Ewing's sarcoma, a rare form of bone cancer, and battled the disease for 2 years. He died at his London home on January 4, 2004, at the age of 59. He left behind 2 daughters from 2 marriages and a body of work that ranged from BBC documentaries to Hollywood spectacle, with one notorious haunted house standing right in the middle of it all. And so our tour ends where it perhaps must end, far from the California sunshine where Poltergeist was born, in a city on another continent, with a director who took on a franchise that had already begun to accumulate its dark reputation. The Poltergeist curse, as it came to be called, was never anything supernatural. It was simply life and death, doing what life and death have always done, arriving without warning, taking people too soon, and leaving the rest of us to remember them. We've traveled from Westwood to Oklahoma, from New Jersey to New England, from Austin to London, visiting 12 people whose paths crossed on a handful of film sets in the 1980s. Some lived long, full lives. Some were taken far too young. All of them left something behind, a performance, a score, a vision that people are still watching, still hearing, still talking about, more than 4 decades later. Thank you for joining us on this tour. Take care out there.